Hey, we're live. We're here. It's your business, and Christy, Dean, and I are glad to have you. This is where we are talking about navigating today's ever-evolving business landscape. And let me tell you that our goal is not only to talk deep into subjects, to bring experience that the three of us as advisors and consultants have to share. We also have these conversations for empowerment, empowering you to assertively navigate, to show up and face the fight you're having, to face the challenge that's going on, to maybe even just go, okay, it's easy. And in that easy, how can we still be dynamic? How can we still face the challenges of doing business today? Let's get ready to lead with depth and understanding and achievement. This is what it means to be a bold business right here. And I'm glad to be your host. I am Jess Duell. Christy and Dean, please introduce yourselves.
Christy Maxfield, owner of Purpose First Advisors. We help owners improve profitability through the lens of exit and succession planning.
And Dean Barta of Barta Business Group. We're professional accounting guides, and we do that through fractional CFO and controller level work for small businesses.
And I'm Jess Duell at Red Direction. We are talking about growth, strategic, intentional growth, figuring out what is the right work to do right now and doing as much of that work as possible. And sometimes it's really surprising. All right, today we're talking about accountability from goals to results. This concept of accountability comes up all the time in our work, and it's one of my favorite A words. I know there's some other ones that are pretty colorful, but this one has a lot of opportunity for us to dive into. So I was curious, Christy and Dean, what are your definitions of accountability?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Christy.
No, you are poised, my friend.
Well,
take the stage.
Since I work primarily with accounting, I've got the root of the word of accountability in our process. Really, it's being, are you going to do what you say you're going to do? And some people, as they call it, is do you walk the talk? Now, accountability it's a two-way street. People hold me accountable and I hold them accountable. So that can be, through a business to business type of client, or it can be an employee employer kind of situation as well.
And for me, it's really accepting responsibility for what you've agreed to do, which requires a level of commitment and clarity. So you can walk that talk.
Oh, and it starts right here. I could point to my head, I could point to my heart, I could point to my gut, but it starts right here with the individual and how we choose to show up and how we ask others to show up. And I would add to those amazing definitions, accountability is a place to not only have boundaries, which I think ensure healthy communication, also healthy conflict. I also think that those boundaries allow us to have some other checks and balances built in, so we don't get stuck in we do this because we said this is how we're going to be accountable, and actually making sure that we are truly holding ourselves accountable, regardless of who we were talking to, if they were brand new to our organization or they're very tenured and have been part of the group for a very long time. And all of that leads us into the why now. Why now? Yeah.
I felt inspired. I could hear it coming from you, Jess. The why now?
The why now? Well, every day it feels like business is getting more complex. There's more systems to connect. We must know and understand all of these other things with completely, very rarely, even nearly perfect information to make decisions from, to face and choose what to do about a risk or a problem that is immediate without taking us off track from these long-term goals. I'm telling you, this constant balance of right now to the future, right now to the future, that's engagement and performance. It's also strategic growth and relevance, and regardless of where we're working, so that everybody's contributions are deriving that success. And I think the ultimate why now, everybody's contributions can drive success. And the companies who harness this will actually be the ones that succeed long term.
I think you hit the nail on the head just earlier when you talked about your business. You are in the business of helping people do the right things at the right time. And so that they can act with intention and be relevant in the market. And I think Dean and I also do that in the different ways that we work with clients. But in order to do the right thing at the right time, there has to be a clarity around what are the goals of the organization? What are we trying to achieve? If I think we're trying to increase revenue by 5% and you're actually focused on diversifying markets, we might actually be working at cross purposes. We may be prioritizing the wrong things or deploying resources in ways that aren't getting the results we want. So we have to start with understanding what have we made the commitment to do together? How are those goals aligned to what we're trying to achieve? And then who gets to play what role in that process? That's how I look at it.
Well, and I will always go back and create give an example of an analogy in the outdoors is, rowing together, because people are, accountability is, you can't only have 20% of your team accountable. You have to have 100% of accountability across the board. And, part of like what you're talking about, Christy, is what the goals are, is what a good definition too is ask your employee, what's their definition of accountability? Because some people, I mean, they're like, part of their way of being accountable is like, I just don't want to let anyone down. So understanding the motivation of how they're going to be able to support those goals, and maybe some people, it might be more, what's in it for them, so, but yeah, but everyone's got to understand what the goals are in their particular function within the company.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ian shared in a dialogue that we were having on LinkedIn earlier today that the best person to keep you accountable for all things is you. And that comes right into the example and what you were just sharing, Dean, building on what Christy was saying earlier.
Well, and whether you're accountable to yourself or accountable to your boss or accountable to your team, it means that you have made a commitment and that you're going to fulfill that commitment. And I think what happens is when we're not accountable first and foremost to ourselves, it then becomes about, well, what are the excuses that are being offered to ourselves or to others about why we were unable to be successful in fulfilling the obligation that we committed to. And so there are always going to be things that derail us, things that slow us down, but letting that be the point at which you stop taking responsibility for forward movement, that's where I think things break down. I have clients who will be like, why aren't we done? Why aren't we done with the thing we said we'd be done with? And rather than folks identifying what steps they could have or things they could have done differently, well, they're like, well, I couldn't get done what I needed to get done because Christy was holding up what she needed to get done, which was being held up by Bob. And if Bob doesn't do it, Christy can't do it. And if Christy doesn't do it, I can't do it. Therefore, I can't be held responsible for the fact that I didn't meet my deadline. Mm-hmm. When in fact, we need to be looking at strategies that say, how do we communicate to Bob what needs to be done and why it's important so that Christy can get what she needs and she understands what needs to be done and why it's important. And then we can fulfill the obligation that responsibility for actually taking the team or marshaling and deploying the resources, human and otherwise, to get the work done is, I think, sometimes a big missing piece in the accountability chain. It's like, well, I was accountable for getting it done, but if other people don't do their stuff, how can I be held accountable? That's not how this goes.
Which goes right back to what Ann was sharing, right? Is, hey, it's got to start here. What if I let things pass me by? What does that actually mean? If I'm going to try and say, well, that just means I'm going to say that, that just means I didn't think too hard about it. And I am trying to not be the one where it stops for whatever reason. And you bring up a really good point. And I think our conversation today really breaks down into these three parts that will look at this concept, Christy, of what you were just outlining very closely in three different ways. I mean, we're talking about why accountability is so important for achieving goals. And you started to take us down this really, really quickly. And I'm going to be like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And then there's the second part is going to be about how can we address these accountability challenges more effectively? Can we recognize them? Can we step in and claim the fact that they are there so we can choose to change or not, but at least it's conscious. And then the third one is where we're working, how we're working, the concepts of what a dynamic workplace looks like, remote, hybrid, all on site is interesting. And we're going to talk about that too, because this also is, all three of these are incredibly changing fast, changing often. And what we think about them, we're not actually talking about. So we don't even know if we agree within an organization of, to Dean's point a lot earlier, of what do you think this means?
That's such an important conversation. What do you think this means? Because we could be using the exact same words and mean very different things, whether it's about accountability or anything else. So defining terms is a great place to start.
Yeah, people, that's the map, right? Is this is our goal. But here's how we think we're going to get to it, and it may be a point A to point B kind of thing. But I think part of what a goal will do is give anybody a visual picture of what needs to happen, right? So, but that goes back to what people need, because people interpret instructions and goals differently, but making sure everybody's just on the same page and moving forward.
And when there's a lack of accountability, things fall apart, literally and figuratively, right? So if we consistently show up and make commitments to each other, and then we consistently fail to deliver on those commitments, we erode trust. And without trust, then I can't show up. And no matter how smart you are, no matter how much I like you, no matter how much I know you care, no matter how much I think you're committed, if I can't rely on you, right? If we think about that component of trust, if I can't rely on you, then I can't show up in fidelity, which means I'm going to do work I could have otherwise delegated, which means I'm not working at my highest and best. It means that I'm going to take on the work of other people because I'm afraid of there being a mistake or a gap or a ball drop. The proverbial ball being dropped is folks who don't trust each other, who don't feel like their peers have accountability, will fill in the gaps in order to not be left holding the bag. And so we're wasting resources, we're wasting talent, we're working on things that may not have high value. We're certainly not communicating, and we're not building anything that can be scaled, because if we can't trust each other, then we can't actually delegate, manage, and collaborate in ways that make our work bigger than its individual parts. Mm-hmm. So it just breaks down.
How do we... That's interesting, this concept of ownership and that need for when one of us, and here's the deal, right? I'm thinking about a sports team. Sometimes somebody's going to miss the sign. Sometimes, or let's say it's training. Sometimes somebody's going to miss all the clues that say this is what's going to happen. Regardless of whatever is going on, when it's missed, the first, how does the person who missed it respond? How are they showing up in that moment? I think the second piece is, how are the people around them that might be either trying to avoid taking responsibility at that point, or are taking responsibility at that point, or some other variation of that? How are they showing up? And what is the body language? What is the intention? Is it a little zingy, right? Or is it, let's get better together? I mean, those are a lot of different things. So when I hear you talk about commitment, and I hear you share about having this depth, I don't think it's personalities. I really think it's just, well, what is can we actually naturally just organically claim what it is, whether we like it or not, negative, neutral, or positive, in response to these challenges, and when the ball gets dropped at first.
And I think the best word I have for it is commitment, making a very conscious, intentional commitment. Am I committed to my job because I need a job? Am I committed to the project because I like the people I'm working with? Am I committed to the company because I believe in its mission or value? What am I committed to? Am I committed to myself? Like, I need to do this, and I need to do it with fidelity and credibility, and this is who I want to be in the world and how I want to be known. But what commitment have you made? And then how have you chosen to react? I'm not a big sports person, but I happen to be a fan of Mr. Mahomes.
Okay.
And having watched a documentary on him and a few other quarterbacks, what I was most impressed by is it is a team sport. And there are things that will go wrong in that game that he has absolutely no control over. But as the quarterback and the team captain, he takes full responsibility for the performance of that team. Now, he knows he can't do he can't possibly go out and play the game by himself. And he's not saying that he personally failed to catch the ball, or in his case, throw the ball. But that he is so invested in his commitment, is so deep to himself, to his team, to the individual players, that there is no question that he considers it part of his responsibility to help the team be a success. And that's just an uncommon level of commitment nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's important, engagement too. And this is tied into what you're saying, Christy, is not only commitment, but engagement. And how engaged are you with, it's difference between being out in the field of play or just sitting in the sidelines, frozen or whatever. And because engagement, that's the action part of commitment, right? Because you can be committed, but where it is actualized is in the engagement. And so let's run the sports analogy, is the person who drops the winning touchdown, or could be the winning touchdown, but drops the ball, is at least he was in the field of play and he did what he could to do it, rather than just giving up on the play. And so engagement with failure is a lot more forgivable than lack of engagement.
Absolutely. And like Jess said, how does he react? So the guy who fumbles the ball, does he say, well, the sun was in my eyes and you didn't throw it the right way, and my cleats got caught up in the AstroTurf? No, he says, like, I dropped the ball. I made the mistake. And that means I have to, and fill in the blank, train harder, be more attentive, practice that maneuver more. But that you've said, like, I'm not deferring this outcome to something else. What I'm saying is I'm going to identify the things that I have control over, and then I'm going to take responsibility for controlling those things that I can. And knowing, like you said, that failure will occur, but it won't be from lack of trying. It won't be from lack of experimenting on how to do it better. So that's I think when leaders look at their teams, and especially when owners make the decision of, can I delegate this task, this really important task that my company relies on? And when owners think about, how can I get my employees to think like owners? How do we help our employees understand the consequences of their decisions? How do we help them make a mistake and learn from the mistake, and so they don't repeat that, and that they can still show up and perform at their best as consistently as possible? So this is a very active, accountability requires a very active, deliberate, intentional conversation and frequent check-ins and feedback and follow-up, which is the piece that every owner will tell you they don't have time to do.
It's true. And I think that comes back to your word commitment. And there's a phrase that sounds extreme, and maybe it is. I'll throw it out here anyway. At all costs, what am I willing to do? What is the thing I'm willing to do at all costs? And if we know that as a mission of our company, and we know that in the way that our work is being done, and we know that in the way in our life, so we know how to show up, at least it's a start, because we have some common language, we have some common mission right there to start from, to get to all of this. I'm going to call it elite, because I'm listening to our conversation so far, and I'm like, how long did it take them to do that and be willing to claim that? What kind of self-work are they doing between their ears? What is the skill set that's necessary to have that thick skin to just let it go? What is the thing when it's really hard, then we can still pick up the person next to us because it's harder for them for whatever reason in the moment, knowing that sometime it's going to be harder for me, and I hope they're there for me.
Yeah,
Do you have ideas about at all costs? Because I could go off.
I think of more like Apollo 13. Failure is not an option, and that can be a huge motivator as well. When I've looked at things that this just has to be done, get it done, at all costs, is innovation happens, sometimes clearer thinking happens. Um, and to me, that's, that can be actually the most exciting part of, the over encompassing goal is, you put a little pressure on it that this has to be done. There's, you've whatever burned your ships, you got to make this thing happen. And, some people that makes them extremely uncomfortable and they freeze, but the people who are really high performers, the ones that, hey, at all costs, or, failure's not an option, and they'll move through it. And usually 100% of the time you'll learn something new with it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I have so many ideas. The first is to offer that perhaps in some cases it's for the sake of rather than at all costs. So for the sake of my marriage, for the sake of my job, for the sake of my well-being, I will do X. So offering that up. I also think if you look at the work done around change management, there is always identified the need for an appropriate sense of urgency, and to not manufacture that, but to have intrinsic motivation within the team. And I hesitate to use that word because you can't always rely on motivation, but that there's an appropriate sense of urgency that is driving the need to make a change, because change in particular is very hard. One caution I have with at all costs is I actually have a client who on a regular basis talks to the team that way. But if each of us we relieve our 5 respective meetings where we've been told to get this thing done at all costs. Well, now it's all about, I have to do it. And now I have to rely on other people to help me do it. And we're all working at 5 different at all cost scenarios, which means that we're not collaborating. We're trying to figure out, how can I get the other people to help me do this at any cost, while they have to be engaged with 3 or 4 other people trying to do the same thing. So I think we have to think about how well we prioritize the collaboration that is inherent in complex organizations. Where 2 or more are gathered, you have complexity. So we have to explain how we need to collaborate to get things done, so that failure is not an option, rather than using that methodology in a way that pits people against each other.
Yeah, I see both of those. And in the results of the companies that I've worked with over all the years I've been doing this, when there is no accountability, their work is redone. When there is no accountability, resources are wasted. When there is no accountability, that just means we have, processes are broken. And I brought today, instead of going into these big things where we've got all this stuff, I was like, well, what about that app you put on your phone called Streaks, where like I'm doing this push-up challenge. Did I do my push-ups Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? And how many did I do? I can put that into my streak and make sure I'm consistently putting this thing into this app. ultimately, at the very base level, when we're talking about reducing work, increasing connection, utilizing resources, making sure everybody knows what their role is, it's almost like, are we just aware if it's being done at all? And if it's not, can we have that conversation? So we're using technology to track, which is something very important in business on a bigger, more complex level. Yet at the same point in time, when we break it down, are we just doing what we're supposed to do? And if we're encountering competing priorities, and if we're encountering ourselves in a team all alone, there are questions to ask and a voice that must ask them.
Yes. I also just think about this notion that we started with of accountability starts with you, to you, for you. I don't know about you all, but I work with a lot of owners who see me as an accountability partner. And it is not because I can wield any punishment against them for not meeting their deadlines, but having an external force, another person who knows what they've committed to, is far more compelling for them than having to tell themselves that they've dropped the ball on something. So there's an interesting phenomenon around that accountability piece that coaches and consultants and advisors play.
Mm-hmm.
And really it has to come where regardless of whether you're motivated or not, is your commitment to yourself deep enough so that you will show up and do these things even when no one's looking? And if it's not yet, how do you use someone looking to create a habit that becomes capable of withstanding distraction, boredom, lethargy, disinterest, lack of motivation? Because we're myself included, we're not really good at being accountable to ourselves. We're much better at being accountable to other people.
Well,
there is something to be said.
There's studies about that accountability. When you have an accountability partner, it creates better results. And whether it's a personal trainer or whatever, sometimes if you view yourself as a person that basically keeps breaking promises to yourself, but you bring in let's say a personal trainer or someone to help you to basically create a new habit of being accountable to yourself, that can be very helpful. And I know I'm one of the ways I'm accountable to myself is I meditate outdoors every single day, and today was 2,554 days, and I do that.
I remember when you started that goal.
Yeah, I just crossed 7 years straight. Woo-hoo! Every single day, and
yes.
and you had mentioned that is it, but I use my ego of trying to keep a streak.
Yes.
And the other part of the ego that helps me, commit to a spiritual goal is I've told people, I said, I haven't come up with basically a valid enough reason not to. So until I can find a valid enough reason not to, because my ego's like, oh, why'd you quit? Oh, I slept in. Well, no, that's so but that's how I've used it as an internal motivation, and I think really within a team, going back to what we talked about at the start of all this too, is what's the internal motivation for being accountable to your team and yourself, and working together, and helping move things forward. Because I mean, frankly, when we're all accountable to like ourselves and other, it just feels good, right?
It does.
It does feel good. And I'll tell you what, I understand why businesses want systems that keep track of things. I understand that these systems that keep track of things maybe feel heavy sometimes, or why are they there? In the sense that they're keeping track of us. Well, that's kind of because if something were to break down, and it broke down at my desk, the whole reason the system is set up is so somebody can come to my desk and say, hey, Jess, what's happening? Is there anything else going on? Right now, we're moving into a place where this is becoming the norm. And I will speak for myself. I think I can speak for our trio here that says we understand there's more than technology to make a business successful, to make a team high functioning. And having these systems helps point to, well, where is the breakdown right now and what can we do together? What do you need, Jess? How can this occur? And I find this fascinating because I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Basecamp or ClickUp or, whatever those tools are for small teams. And you get bigger and you have enterprise tools for large teams. And the purpose is only that. It's not to keep track of us. It's to make sure that the person knows where something is in a process and can go straight to the source instead of asking around, right? Let's reduce the time it takes to get to the problem and go find a place we can help solve the problem and help understand what's behind it. Because to the point about ego, well, sometimes, it's just a lot and overwhelming. Sometimes it was a forget. And sometimes there was a really good reason. And there was a reason, but nobody thought to ask me and I forgot to tell everybody. And I think that that's fair too, to build on this conversation. And in fact, look at this. Pam was having a conversation on LinkedIn earlier today too about this conversation as we were getting ready for our live stream today. And she says accountability is the engine behind every scalable system. And if you're not clear on who owns what and by when, even the best strategy stalls out.
Amen to that. I
Yep,
mean,
that's
clarity
true.
of role, purpose, and process is where it starts. And then from there, use whatever technology you want. Your good old-fashioned pen and paper is still a technology. I love a good list so long as it has deadlines on it, right? So I don't leave a room without knowing when do you need that by? And then who do I have access to help me make it happen? And then if I'm the person delegating, what do you need from me to be successful, right? Like these are prerequisites for you being able to be accountable because now I have to do this by this time with these resources, and then I can ask for help if I need it.
You want to know something? Somebody has to actually decide what the thing is with all of those elements that you just said. And guess who that is in my company? It's me. So by the way, if that's you, don't be worried about the fact that you might not know all those things that go into making it to actually have. I think that's why we're talking today. We're like, oh yeah, there's a pre-step. Oh, I decided I was going to go over and do this thing and everybody wants something I don't have yet. Okay, pause. Let's back up. There's a little more work to do. No problem. No problem. And I think tell me what you two think. I think that that's really important when we're talking about it is we're talking about things that are like already ready to go. I'm going to pull back a minute and say, somebody's got to make those things that allow everybody else to go do all the stuff that we've just been talking about. And usually it's us that's listening and watching right here.
Yeah, you're the maestro. You know where all the parts to go and all that, and the accompaniment and all that. But and that's one of the within my own team, and even when I was in management and all that, I always liked being in those leadership positions. I kept people accountable, but they kept me accountable and kept me, on my toes about things. And I had to be thinking, really 6 months in advance and all that, so that, those resources and software and tools and all those things were lined up for my team when they needed them. But that's where, the business owner is not only keeping the vision of the company, but also making sure all those is the maestro of your company as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this brings us into the second part of our conversation, which is how do we address these challenges effectively? And I'm really glad for that transition and that thought-provoking thing that just made me say, we might have to take a step back and do that work because it might not be done yet. And I think that that's incredibly important. And we do lean into tools to do that. We do lean into delegation to do that. And at some point, we can delegate. But if we don't know the reason why the work is being done the way that it is, we actually are going to have inefficiencies in our system. We're going to have these natural breakdowns that are nobody's fault, yet they're everybody's fault because everybody just went into the steps instead of taking a step back and looking at the larger picture. How are we relevant? What is our business model? Is our business model safe from disruption today? If so, or if not, how long do we actually have? What are the things we need to think about? What are all of these bigger elements? And then when we have our team together, right? I'm going to go back to, there are tools out there that measure all of this stuff. And the thing is, I'm going to tell you, in this world today, that's great as a baseline. It is not the solution. It is something that happened in the past. I'm going to just say, whatever is in the past, that's all it is the past. We can berate the past, or we can actually use the past as a guide to decide what is our decision actually in front of us today. And that's where I think accountability shifts from whatever we're tracking into something that is productive and dynamic, is from that very thing. Can we take a step back? Can we look at the bigger picture? And can we ask and know that the people we are asking will be honest with us, their understanding of how things work, what the priorities are. If they're confused, will they tell us they're confused? And all of those things come back to something that Christy said at the very beginning, which was, that's how we build trust. And so I'm a big proponent of tools, as long as they're working with the strengths and the experiences of each of the persons that choose to come to work every day with you and Christy and Dean. Because here's the deal. It doesn't matter what our background is. It matters that it's diverse. It doesn't matter what our background is. It matters that we saw something, or whoever put the person in that position and said, yes, this is who we want on our team now. Come on in. We're going to onboard you and make you part of this. Whatever our criteria was for that happened. And so now this is where the rubber meets the road. And I'm a big believer in fairness. And I also believe fairness doesn't look the same for every single person, because otherwise all we're doing is getting a standard. Otherwise, all we're doing is having this opportunity to be lumped in and have a rating. And what does that rating actually mean? Because if my work is unique to me and my experiences, even though I'm getting a function of a job completed and being part of some bigger end game here, every single person in this company is going to be the same as me. And so we can't actually have that standard anymore where we're all the same. It actually can create fight or flight in us. It can create anxiety in us. And these are the things that, just as people, when we already have enough stress in this life, in this world, and the things that we're working with. If we're coming to work and we're having more, now what, right? Now what? So when I think about fairness, how do we dig into fairness? Like Christy was talking about accountability with commitment. I think about fairness, and I think a little bit about genuineness, and going even one step further. Am I being dignified? Am I allowing others to have space to have their own dignity as well? And that word dignity came from an article that I'll make sure that we link to. It was about encouraging employee engagement from HBR. So from Harvard Business Review. So we'll get that linked into the show notes. But the thing is, we have to remember, because as we go, what do? We're creative. We like the shortest way possible. We want to optimize. And some of us are really good at optimizing, and others of us are always optimizing differently. In that optimization, we're making assumptions. And in those assumptions, biases can occur. So when we're talking about accountability, we can't forget about our blind spots. We can't forget about the things that we're optimizing that might accidentally get in the way of our bigger goals, which not only erode our culture, but they get in the way of our priorities too.
And optimizing requires change. Change requires a transition. And so we have to be respectful of the fact that people are going to mourn the lack of continuity. They're going to mourn not being able to do it the way they wanted to do it or have been doing it before they can make the transition into doing it differently. So I think the thing where my eyes really lit up was where you say, have we built a culture where the team can give informed feedback about what it actually takes to do what you're asking? Because as leaders, we'll come in and say, well, I need this information. I need these data points. I need that. And we don't necessarily appreciate that it takes 3 systems and 2 manual procedures to get that done. and we're not even actually sure why we need the thing, but we've decided we need it, right? And so that's where I've seen the most friction, where people are resisting change not because they don't believe that the thing they're being asked to help accomplish is important, but because their perception is you don't fully appreciate what this requires and how hard it will be to get you what you need. And so we have to have honest dialogue about that. And then those creatives who have come to the table and said, I need this new data point. We need to look at it this way. I need to be able to assess that. Say, do I actually need it? Or are my people better off being deployed in different ways that use their talents? I have a client who often uses the word should. We should have a meeting about that. We should make a decision about that. And in every meeting I'm in, my job with them is to say, do you actually want that done? If so, by when? Right? That decision of, are you actually saying, we need to do this by the 31st? Or are you trying to be nice and expecting somebody to say, I'll get that done by the 31st for you? Because that doesn't work. That other thing that someone else will step up and close the gap between the thing I've identified needs to be done and actually getting it done. So don't underestimate the importance of being the one to make the decision that something needs to happen, even if you end up changing your mind later. You can always reserve the right to say, upon further reflection, I don't actually need it by the 31st. Or in fact, I need it by the 21st.
That's very kind of you. Upon further reflection, I usually stumble right through that. Well, I got some new information. Or, hey, I thought about it and I actually don't think I like what I said. or
that. All that.
You know?
Or all that. Like, you have permission to change your mind.
Yeah.
You just need to be clear about it and communicate it to people when you do.
My biggest one, my favorite one is, I'm so glad you told me that in response to what I just asked of you. And then I had a chance to go reflect and come back and say, I got to listen. I listened to you. I hear you. What do you think about this? So so I took a decision that needed to be made and I got into a compromise that helped elevate everybody and have some ownership, and everything then can move forward.
I agree with everything you said.
I love when we leave Dean speechless.
Yeah, that doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen very often. I'm like sitting there, right on. Awesome. Perfect.
Well, so we'll do this real quick then. I'm going to, earlier in our conversation on LinkedIn, Melissa shared, she is a fine artist and is a painter. And she said, I hold myself accountable to my easel. Hands down, this is my work. My work happens when I'm doing. So that was little Jessica ad. And then she says, steady attention is communication, which is also a part of my job. So her team focuses on their output first of creating their paintings, and then they are communicating and having meetings with that communication to set their priorities and go. And by the way, I thought this was beautiful and reflective of a super simple thing, because I know my business levers. I know what my product is. I know where my money comes from, and I'm making informed, intentional decisions because of that. That's what accountability really is in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And then meetings are a tool, just like apps are tools, or spreadsheets are tools, or handwritten to-do lists are tools. Meetings are tools too.
Yes.
So we need to make sure that when we are meeting, we're using the right type of meeting to do the right thing and move things forward. Most people are like, oh, nobody needs another meeting, right? Well, maybe they actually do, because the meetings that they have aren't structured well, aren't well defined, don't actually propel things forward, take too much time, or don't take enough time. So really, I think her point about the more we're touching base, the more we're having those regular meetings, the more likelihood that we are communicating and being heard and understood, and we can move faster. Because otherwise I might just be sitting in my own space going, I really need feedback on this, this, and this, but I can't get any time with people. And until I can get that time with them, I can't move this forward.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, welcome. You're already here. So I'm going to say, look, you're listening to It's Your Business. And it's brought to you by the Bold Business Podcast. I'm Jess, and my co-hosts and panelists are
Christy Maxfield. I'm with Purpose First Advisors. We work with owners to improve profitability through the lens of exit and succession planning.
And Dean Barta at Barta Business Group. We're professional accounting guides working in the space of fractional CFO, fractional controllership services for small businesses.
And we've been talking about accountability and what it means to be bold in our business through accountability. Our first section talked about why it was important and how does it actually tie to our goals. Our second section, as we're just wrapping this up, is how can we as leaders address accountability and the challenges related to accountability effectively. And here we go. We're moving into our third part, and we're talking about best practices, not only to foster accountability overall, but in remote and hybrid work environments.
Yeah, and my whole team, we're entirely virtual, and what I communicate to my team is, even though we're on our own virtual islands, is I said we still work as a team, and it's very important to, hey, don't try to figure out the solution, or if you're having an issue by yourself. We're all here, just like if we were sitting in a brick and mortar office. uh, Reach out, because Cynthia may know something that Aaron doesn't know, and Ian, Owen may know something that Barbara doesn't know. So it's definitely reminding people that, because since remote working and hybrid working is, it's the future is here. It's been here for since COVID, really. Is we still work as a team, and how to, you could still treat it just like you were showing up to work, and make sure people are in that mindset, so they're not siloed in their own work process.
Mm-hmm.
One of my colleagues shared that during COVID, they started doing Zoom work calls, which were literally just you log on and you do your work while keeping your Zoom open, right? And it sounds kind of like, y'all just going to watch me work? But it created this proximity that was missing, so that folks felt a little bit more accountable to each other, but also they felt the camaraderie of, I could look up, I could see if Christy, is at her desk, or see, like, just like I would in my workplace if we were all co-located. I could look up and see who's at their desk, who's taking a lunch break, who's doing what. And I could also just get on and chat and say, like, do you actually have 5 minutes? And we could go into a breakout room. We could have a conversation. We could come back and rejoin the team. And there were a lot of skeptics, but she reported, like, I did it and I liked it. And I did it and I felt less alone. I did it and I felt more connected to my team members. And it still sounds a little hokey. Like, I'm just going to log on to a Zoom and be quiet and do my work while y'all have the opportunity to watch me do it. But the outcomes were really high, and the benefit was substantial enough that they've kept doing it post-COVID.
That's interesting. I got really good at feedback running dispersed teams. So early in my career, we had an office of, I think, 7 or 9, something like that. And then as we were acquired, and I was part of the acquiring team that was bringing on other companies, none of the other companies' teams came to us. We didn't go to the head office. So I became, responsible for, well, how do we do this? And I think one of the things that I got really good at was feedback. And some of it's full circle is, all right, half the time I stuck my foot in my mouth, not on purpose, but because I was missing information that I thought I had. So what was that? What did I have to do then? It was either things were already done or other decisions had been made, and somehow I wasn't privy to them. And in the end, it was all my responsibility. So I had to change the way that I interacted with everybody, both in my office, outside my door, as well as dispersed across the United States. And I will tell you, this concept of how opening with questions doing check-ins, understanding what's going on. And I believe in small talk, but not when work is getting done. I think that there's an element of our time is precious. It is a scarce resource. We already have so much. So if I'm showing up with something, I got to lead with the thing I'm showing up for. And if there's time at the end, cool. So that's an approach that I have. But when I think about feedback, we're talking about behavior. If I'm not seeing the result of behavior, regardless of what the behavior is, we may or may not see it. But if I'm not seeing the result I'm looking for, it seems like there's a behavior, something to occur, conversation to be had. So how can you ask the question? How can you engage? Because early, constant, direct communication sets that stage for everything that the two of you already have just shared of, cool, I'm going to be direct. We're going to be straightforward. We're going to get to the crux of this. And by the way, I don't mind having egg on my face. Oh, I didn't know that was going on. Could you please fill me in? That sounds really important. Oh, what was the reason that you felt that this was the most important thing? Because then now what we're doing, regardless of the distance between us, regardless of our ability to see each other, sometimes it's on the phone, sometimes it's by text, sometimes it's some messenger program. We have the ability to actually really connect and be seen and heard, even when it's all typing now, right? As one example. And so feedback, I'm a big proponent of feedback when it comes to dispersed and remote work, and just being direct and knowing that, hey, we all are making these decisions, and we can all be better at having conversations about them. So I'll be the first to say, I might have egg on my face about this, and I'm okay with that, because heck, you don't know until you know. But the more you know somebody and the more you practice, the more it's easier to get to that direct, honest, open, clear communication that really supports the best working environment. And people think that they work better remotely, and that might be why.
Well, I think it's important, and you took the lead in that situation, Jess, is that, hey, it's not, okay, well, you're managing the situation and you're above the fray of the team. No, you're right there in it, and you're accepting is critical feedback as much as anyone else. And to me, there's a lot of value in that. Is that no one's above above anything, and it fosters trust. What we've talked about before, and that's a good cultural move. And for some people, they got to swallow a little bit of pride and ego in order to get that. But people will grow from that when they allow themselves to be in those situations.
Mm-hmm. And I think that being able to build connection remotely is incredibly important. So I'm like you, Jess. I like to get right to the point, get the work done, respect your time. But I've really come to appreciate the importance of the check-in, the importance of taking time to check in with each other as human beings, and what's going on and how are you showing up to this work today, and then shifting gears into actually getting the work done together. But skipping that part really does damage the ability to connect and be present.
I just do them at different times. So I was totally thinking about accountability. And thank you, though, for calling that out and bringing that up, because you're right. You're right. Unless we were all talking between these things, who knows what would be happening here, right?
Oh my God. It's kind of a free for all, even though we planned it, but without planning, who knows what we were talking about? But it would be fun. Damn it!
I was going to say, may not be productive,
but it'll be damn fun.
It would be super fun.
But finding ways to be present. My husband's boss works. His company is in Canada. And so his boss is in Canada. And thankfully, we're on the same time zone. Otherwise, everybody would be a little loopy. But his boss actually wants Chris, my husband, to call him a couple times a week. Not with an agenda, just to kind of check in. How's it going? What do you need? Here's where I am. I mean, he has a formal way of updating him on projects, but he's been told explicitly, like, just pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you call and all we do is say, yep, I'm good.
Yeah.
Which is weird because like we feel like everything we do has to have meaning and purpose and focus and attention. And this does, it just looks very different. The meaning, purpose, focus, and attention is about connecting as individuals. It's about closing communication gaps. It's about trying to replicate that, innovation centers were designed originally because of a belief in the power of proximity, that if scientists were near business people and business people were near creatives and creatives were near, right? That proximity itself would create these serendipitous moments. And then we all went virtual during COVID, and we discovered, well, there are benefits from being not being co-located, but proximity still plays a big role in how we transmit information, how we learn about each other, how we gauge, like read the room. It's hard to read the room if you're not in the room. And so I think we will continue. I don't think anybody has the playbook yet on how best to do this, but there's no reason I should be less accountable to either of you because we're in 3 different time zones, right? Like there's nothing that the fact that we've never been in a room together shouldn't make it. We've made a commitment to each other. We show up and we do what we said we were going to do, like we talked about earlier. We bring problem solving to the table. We bring creativity to the table. We bring fun and forgiveness. Like, yeah, sometimes one of us is going to be late or show up a little more distracted than others, but we know that we can still count on each other. And that's in 3 different time zones, folks. Come on now.
That's right. And, to the point of I'm good, sometimes that's all there is. And that's, by the way, I would consider that a really big win. I know people might go, that's a small win, but hey, having the conversation of I'm good is incredibly powerful and like, cool, I don't need to have a problem to work here. How amazing is that?
Or for somebody to care about me and pay attention to me,
Both.
right? Because
yeah.
I mean, a separate subject, like we always pour a lot of time and energy into our low performers, trying to help them be better performers. And we often neglect our shining stars. And so sometimes our shining stars just need our attention and our presence, even though they're good, like they got it. But especially when a disproportionate amount of our energy usually goes to folks who aren't good and don't get it.
And that creates an imbalance for managers too, right? I mean, Meredith was sharing in our LinkedIn conversation today, when she was in the corporate world, there were many times that she realized that managers and supervisors, they weren't holding anybody accountable because they were overwhelmed themselves. And this concept of what we're talking about right here actually really applies in terms of, are you good? Are you good? Just being able to have that human to human check-in. I think that's great.
Well, basically, we're all asking you to talk to each other more. Sorry, Dean.
No. And, as a company, you should be looking at who are the managers and supers because they're probably holding back progress, and because they're overwhelmed. Well, why are they overwhelmed? And as owners of companies or executives need to look at every link of that chain of the whole team. It's not just who might be the worker bees. Okay, so that's a more holistic way. It's like, hey. And sometimes you're like, hey, we need either more managers, or the managers are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, because that can, any part of those that break down, it goes back to the same thing I mentioned at the beginning. They're everyone's not rowing at the same stroke, and so people who are overwhelmed, that's part of it, is they're off, and they need the support too.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground today. I want to hear what your biggest takeaways are.
She always gets me with this one. So what is my biggest takeaway? I think the commitment piece is my biggest takeaway. What are you committed to? Who are you committed to? And how does that commitment translate into accountability?
And in mine, accountability it goes both ways. It's circular, but it's all in the same ecosystem. So if you have one piece of your team that isn't being accountable, then as a team, you're not accountable. So you got to look at every link of the chain and make sure when everyone's in full accountability, and that's where the beautiful results happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know what I realized as I was sharing throughout this whole thing was I was using a lot of examples here from me. So I'm going to say, I think my biggest takeaway was something that maybe we never said out loud, which is walk the talk. And if we can walk the talk, mess ups, missteps, then we're creating a space where other people may also do the same thing so that we can get to the communication and understand what is the right thing to do right now.
Awesome takeaways.
I know, right? I was like, there you have it. We are good. We are done. Hey, this is It's Your Business. And how cool is it that we have completed another live stream today? I can't wait to see you next time.